I was standing in my driveway, coffee in hand, watching the morning sun hit my solar panels when I heard the sharp clicking of heels on pavement behind me. That sound alone was enough to make my stomach drop, because in Meadowbrook Heights, Arizona, that particular cadence only belonged to one person, Deborah Garrison, president of our homeowners association and the bane of my existence for the past 6 months. "Oliver Anderson, we need to talk," she announced, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that barely masked her irritation. I turned around slowly, taking a long sip of my coffee before acknowledging her presence. She stood there in her perfectly pressed pantsuit, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, her blonde bob not moving an inch despite the early morning breeze. "Good morning, Deborah," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I had learned early on that showing any emotion around this woman was like throwing gasoline on a fire. "Good morning," she scoffed, gesturing dramatically toward my roof. "There's nothing good about waking up to this eyesore polluting our beautiful neighborhood. Those solar panels are a violation of our community standards, and I'm here to inform you that the HOA board has voted unanimously to demand their immediate removal." I nearly choked on my coffee. The panels had been up for 3 years now, long before Deborah had moved into the neighborhood and seized control of the HOA like some kind of suburban dictator. "Excuse me. These panels were approved by the previous board. I have all the paperwork." "That was then, this is now," she said, thrusting a letter at me. "We've updated our architectural guidelines. Section 4.7 now clearly states that no external modifications that alter the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood are permitted. You have 30 days to remove them, or we'll be forced to take legal action and fine you $500 per day until compliance is achieved." I stared at the letter, my mind racing. The solar panels weren't just some eco-friendly hobby project. They were the backbone of something much bigger, something Deborah and her cronies clearly didn't understand. My installation was part of a microgrid system that I'd designed and built myself, leveraging my background as an electrical engineer. What started as a personal project had evolved into something that now provided power to over 40 homes in our development, including several on the HOA board itself. "Deborah, I don't think you understand what these panels actually do," I began carefully. "I don't need to understand," she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "They're ugly, they make the neighborhood look cheap, and they're coming down. End of discussion." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back down the street toward her own pristine house, leaving me standing there with the letter crumpling in my grip. I went back inside and immediately called my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who had helped me navigate the original installation permits. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, then let out a long sigh. "Oliver, technically they can't force you to remove panels that were legally installed under previous guidelines," he said, "but they can make your life miserable in the process." "How attached are you to staying in that neighborhood?" "Very," I replied. "It's not just about my house, Marcus. Do you remember the microgrid project I told you about?" There was a pause. "The one where you're basically running a mini power company?" "Exactly. I've got 43 homes connected to my system. When the grid went down last summer during that heat wave, we were the only section of Meadowbrook that still had power. I've invested over $200,000 in battery storage, inverters, and the distribution infrastructure. If I remove those panels, all of that becomes worthless, and a lot of my neighbors lose their backup power source." Marcus whistled low. "Does the HOA know about this?" "I don't think so. Most people just know they signed up for cheaper electricity through my program. They don't really understand the technical details." Well, you're going to need to educate them, and fast. I'll draft a response to the HOA citing the prior approval and the legal protections for solar installations under Arizona state law. But Oliver, you should know this could get ugly. Deborah Garrison doesn't strike me as the type to back down easily. He had no idea how right he was. The next day, I started making calls to my microgrid subscribers. The first person I reached was Tom Martinez, a retired firefighter who lived 3 houses down. Oliver, are you serious? She wants you to take down the whole system. That's what she's demanding, I confirmed. Tom, I need to be straight with you. If I'm forced to remove the panels, the entire microgrid goes offline. Your house would go back to relying solely on the main power grid. The main grid that's about as reliable as a screen door on a submarine, Tom muttered. Listen, my wife has a CPAP machine. When we lost power last year, if it weren't for your system, we would have been in serious trouble. We ended up hosting my sister-in-law and her kids too because their place was sweltering. You can't let that woman shut this down. I had similar conversations throughout the day. Sarah Chen, a single mother with 2 kids, nearly panicked when I told her. Oliver, I work from home. I can't afford to lose power during the day. My entire income depends on having reliable electricity for my computer and internet. By evening, I had a growing list of very concerned neighbors, many of whom I suggested should attend the next HOA meeting scheduled for the following week. If Deborah wanted a fight, she was going to get one, but I was determined to handle this the right way. The week crawled by with an uncomfortable tension hanging over the neighborhood. I noticed Deborah making her rounds, clipboard ever present, no doubt documenting every perceived violation she could find. My mailbox suddenly became a target, with a notice stating it was 2 inches too far from the curb. My grass was inadequately edged. My house numbers were the wrong font according to updated guidelines. It was petty harassment, and we both knew it. The night before the HOA meeting, I stayed up late preparing a presentation. I pulled together data on our microgrid's performance, cost savings for participants, environmental impact, and most importantly, the reliability statistics. During the 12 months the system had been fully operational, my grid had achieved 99.7% uptime, compared to the municipal grid's 92% in our area. I had graphs, charts, and testimonials from neighbors. If I was going down, I was going down swinging. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a bland rectangular building that smelled like stale coffee and air freshener. When I arrived 15 minutes early, the parking lot was already packed. Apparently, word had spread, and people were interested in seeing this showdown. Inside, the room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long table where Deborah sat flanked by the other board members. Richard Kowalski, treasurer, Patricia Hughes, secretary, and 2 at-large members, Janet Morrison and Stephen Blake. Deborah's eyes narrowed when she saw me walk in, followed by a stream of residents who filled the seats and lined the walls. "Looks like we have quite a turnout tonight," she said with forced cheerfulness as she banged the gavel to call the meeting to order. "Let's begin with the usual business. First, a reminder that garbage cans must be stored out of sight by 7 p.m. on collection days. Second, the playground renovation project is on schedule and under budget. Third, we need to discuss the ongoing violation of architectural standards by a resident who has refused to comply with a lawful order to remove unauthorized solar installations." "Point of order," I called out, standing up. The solar panels were authorized under the previous architectural guidelines, which were in place when I completed the installation 3 years ago. I have the approval documents. Deborah's smile tightened. Mr. Anderson, you'll have a chance to speak during the public comment period. Please sit down. I remained standing. With all due respect, you just characterized my installation as unauthorized, which is factually incorrect and defamatory. I think that needs to be corrected before we continue. A murmur ran through the crowd. Richard, the treasurer, leaned over to whisper something to Deborah. She looked annoyed but conceded. Fine. The solar panels were previously authorized but are now in violation of updated standards. Is that satisfactory, Mr. Anderson? It's accurate, I replied, sitting back down. Tom gave me a subtle thumbs up from his seat nearby. The meeting dragged on through various mundane topics, but the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew the main event was coming. Finally, Deborah reached the agenda item labeled Solar Panel Compliance Issue. As I mentioned earlier, we have a situation where a resident has refused to comply with our updated architectural guidelines, she began, launching into what sounded like a prepared speech. While we appreciate individual initiative in home improvements, we must maintain the cohesive aesthetic that makes Meadowbrook Heights such a desirable place to live. Solar panels, particularly large arrays like the one Mr. Anderson has installed, create visual pollution that negatively impacts property values for the entire community. The board has voted to require removal within 30 days, and I think we should now hear from Mr. Anderson before we discuss enforcement mechanisms. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the projector. Thank you, Deborah. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board and my neighbors. I want to start by explaining exactly what my solar installation actually is, because I don't think everyone understands the full picture. The first slide appeared on the screen, showing a diagram of the microgrid system. 3 years ago, I installed what started as a standard residential solar array with battery backup. However, over time, I expanded it into a neighborhood microgrid that currently serves 43 homes in this development. These homes receive electricity through a combination of my solar generation, battery storage, and intelligent management software that I designed. I clicked to the next slide, showing the connection map. I watched as several board members leaned forward with interest, including Richard, whose house I could see was one of the connected properties. The benefits of this system are significant, I continued. First, participants save an average of 38% on their electricity costs. Second, the system provides backup power during outages. Last summer, when we had that 5-day heat wave and the main grid failed repeatedly, every house on my microgrid maintained full power. No food spoilage, no health risks from heat, no disruption. Sarah Chen raised her hand from the audience. Oliver saved my family thousands of dollars last year. I work from home, and I can't afford to lose power. This system has been a lifesaver. Deborah tried to interject, but I kept going, moving to the next slide showing environmental impact data. Third, the microgrid has generated over 200,000 kilowatt-hours of clean energy in the past year, reducing carbon emissions equivalent to taking 37 cars off the road. And fourth, it increases property values, not decreases them. Homes with microgrid access in our neighborhood have sold for an average of 6% more than comparable homes without it. That's anecdotal, Deborah said sharply. You can't prove causation. Actually, I can, I replied, pulling up documentation from recent home sales. I consulted with a licensed property appraiser who analyzed the data. It's all here in the report, which I'm happy to provide to the board. Richard cleared his throat. Oliver, I have to ask. You mentioned my house is on this system. I signed up for what I thought was just a solar lease program. Are you saying you're actually generating the power I'm using? Partially, yes, I confirmed. During peak sunlight hours, you're using power directly from my panels. During other times, you're drawing from my battery storage. When that's depleted, the system seamlessly switches to the main grid. You probably haven't even noticed the transitions because they're automatic and instantaneous. And if you remove the panels, someone called out from the back, then everyone on the microgrid goes back to full dependence on the main grid, with no backup during outages and higher electricity costs, I said simply. The system doesn't work without the solar generation. The room erupted in concerned chatter. Deborah banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. This is all very interesting, Mr. Anderson, but it doesn't change the fundamental issue. Your panels are an eyesore, and they violate our current standards. The fact that you've created some elaborate electrical scheme doesn't exempt you from following the rules like everyone else. An elaborate electrical scheme. Tom stood up, his voice rising. Lady, this elaborate scheme kept my wife's medical equipment running when the power went out. It's not just about saving money. It's about safety and reliability. I understand that, Mr. Martinez, Deborah replied with exaggerated patience. But one person's convenience doesn't override the community's standards. If we make exceptions for Mr. Anderson, then everyone will want exceptions. Where does it end? Patricia, the secretary, spoke up for the first time. Deborah, I think we need to consider the broader implications here. If Oliver's system is powering 43 homes and we force him to shut it down, we're going to have a lot of very upset residents. Those residents can install their own systems if they want solar power so badly, Deborah snapped. That's not our problem. I shook my head. It doesn't work that way. Individual residential solar systems can't provide the same level of reliability or cost savings as a microgrid. The scale is what makes it efficient. The battery storage alone would cost each household over $15,000 to replicate independently. Most people can't afford that. Again, not our problem, Deborah insisted. We're here to maintain property standards, not run a charity for people who want cheap electricity. The room was getting heated now, with multiple people trying to speak at once. I raised my voice to be heard over the din. Let me ask you something, Deborah. Where do you think your house gets its power when the main grid goes down? She blinked, caught off guard by the question. What? My house runs on the regular power grid, obviously. Not entirely, I said, pulling up another slide. This one showed the grid topology in detail, with colored lines indicating power flow paths. Your house is at 1247 Meadowbrook Lane, correct? You know where I live, she said icily. Then you should know that your house is on Circuit 7 of the neighborhood distribution system. During the outages last summer, Circuit 7 received backup power from my microgrid. In fact, according to my monitoring data, your house specifically drew approximately 380 kilowatt-hours from my batteries during those outages. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Deborah's face went through several shades of red before settling on a deep crimson. That's impossible. I would know if I was using your power. Why would you? The transition is automatic and seamless. Your lights stayed on, your air conditioning kept running, your refrigerator didn't stop. From your perspective, it would have seemed like you never lost power at all. But trust me, you did. The main grid was completely down in this area for a cumulative 18 hours during that heat wave. If my system hadn't been there, your house would have been without power just like the rest of the city. Richard was tapping away on his phone, apparently looking something up. She's right about the outages. I remember now. The news was reporting widespread blackouts across Phoenix, but our lights barely flickered. I thought we just got lucky with the grid topology. You got lucky because Oliver's system carried the load, Tom said. And now you want to tear it down because you don't like how the panels look. Deborah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. I don't care what conspiracy theories Mr. Anderson is spreading. The panels are ugly, they're against our rules, and they're coming down. The board has already voted. Actually, Richard said slowly, I'm not sure we should enforce this. If what Oliver is saying is true and his system is providing real value to the community, maybe we need to reconsider. We already voted, Deborah practically shouted. We can vote again, Patricia added. I agree with Richard. This is more complicated than we realized. Janet Morrison, one of the at-large members who had been silent until now, raised her hand. I'd like to make a motion to table the enforcement action until we can get an independent assessment of the microgrid system and its impact on the community. Seconded, Richard said immediately. Deborah looked like she was about to explode. You can't do this. I'm the president. We voted and the decision stands. The president doesn't have unilateral authority, Deborah, Patricia said, her voice firm but professional. Janet has made a motion, Richard has seconded it. We need to vote. The vote was 4-1, with only Deborah voting against tabling the enforcement. She slammed her gavel down so hard I thought it might break. Fine. Meeting adjourned. As people filed out, several neighbors came up to thank me and share their own stories about how the microgrid had helped them. Deborah left immediately, her heels clicking angrily as she stormed out of the building. I had a sinking feeling this wasn't over. I was proven right 2 days later when I received a certified letter from the City of Phoenix Building Department. Someone had filed a complaint alleging that my electrical installation was not properly permitted and potentially violated safety codes. The letter demanded that I provide complete documentation within 10 days and submit to an inspection, or face fines and possible forced disconnection. I called Marcus immediately. She's escalating, he said grimly. If the city finds any violations, even minor ones, they could shut down your whole operation while you sort it out. My permits are all in order, I protested. I've been inspected twice already, and everything passed with flying colors. Then you have nothing to worry about, Marcus said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Get all your documentation together and cooperate fully with the inspection. Make sure everything is absolutely by the book. The inspection was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend quadruple checking every connection, every breaker, every grounding rod. My system was professionally installed and maintained, but I knew Deborah would be hoping for any excuse to shut me down. The inspector who showed up was a weathered man in his 50s named James Carroll. He carried a clipboard and a serious expression as I walked him through the entire setup, starting with the rooftop panels and moving through the garage where the inverters and battery banks were housed. This is impressive work, he admitted, examining the neat rows of batteries and the sophisticated monitoring equipment. How long did it take you to set all this up? About 2 years from initial installation to full microgrid operation, I explained. I started with just my own house, then gradually expanded as neighbors expressed interest. And you designed all the distribution infrastructure yourself. I did. I'm a licensed electrical engineer. Here's my professional engineer stamp on the plans. I showed him the documentation, including the sealed drawings that had been submitted for the original permits. James nodded, making notes on his clipboard. The complaint alleged you were operating an unlicensed power company and creating safety hazards. From what I'm seeing so far, those allegations appear to be unfounded. Your permits are in order, the installation meets code, and the safety systems are actually better than what I usually see in residential setups. Relief washed over me. So I'm clear. I need to finish my inspection and file my report, but unless I find something unexpected, yes. Whoever filed this complaint either didn't understand what they were looking at, or they were hoping to cause trouble for you without justification. It didn't take a genius to figure out which one applied to Deborah. James spent another hour going over every detail, testing ground fault protection, verifying breaker ratings, and examining the emergency shutoff systems. When he finally packed up his equipment, he shook my hand. "Mr. Anderson, your system is one of the cleanest, most professional residential installations I've seen. I'll have my report filed by the end of the week, and I'll note that all allegations in the complaint were unsubstantiated. If you want my personal opinion, communities need more setups like this, not fewer." "Tell that to my HOA president," I said wryly. He chuckled. "Trust me, I've dealt with HOA disputes before. They can get nasty, but from a building and safety perspective, you're in the clear. Keep doing what you're doing." After James left, I allowed myself a moment of cautious optimism. The city inspection had gone well, and I had the support of most of the HOA board now. Maybe Deborah would realize she was fighting a losing battle and back off. I should have known better. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the interim, I started noticing strange things happening around the neighborhood. Several of my microgrid subscribers reported receiving anonymous letters warning them that participating in my illegal power scheme could result in liability if someone was injured or property was damaged. The letters were unsigned but printed on the same weight and color of paper that the HOA used for official correspondence. Sarah Chen called me, worried. "Oliver, I got this letter saying I could be sued if your system causes a fire or electrocutes someone. Is that true?" "Sarah, my system is fully insured with $5 million in liability coverage," I assured her. "I gave everyone the insurance documentation when they signed up. These letters are scare tactics, nothing more. But the campaign was effective." By the time the next board meeting rolled around, 3 families had asked to be disconnected from the microgrid. I complied immediately, not wanting anyone to feel pressured to participate, but it stung to see the carefully built network start to fracture. The meeting room was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different. There was suspicion and worry in the air, replacing the earlier solidarity. Deborah looked pleased as she surveyed the crowd, clearly sensing that momentum had shifted in her favor. "Let's begin tonight's meeting," she announced, her voice sugary sweet. "I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room. We've all heard about Mr. Anderson's so-called microgrid, and I'm sure many of you have received information recently about the potential risks involved." "You mean the anonymous scare letters?" Tom called out. "We all know who sent those, Deborah." Her expression didn't change. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but if residents are receiving information that helps them make informed decisions about their safety, I'd say that's a good thing. Now, I'd like to introduce someone who can speak to the technical concerns we should all have." She gestured to a man sitting in the front row. "This is Gerald Harper, a licensed electrician with 30 years of experience. Mr. Harper, would you like to address the community?" Gerald stood up, and I immediately felt my stomach sink. I recognized him, a contractor who had bid on the original installation of my system. I had gone with a different company because his quote was exorbitant, and his approach seemed outdated. He clearly remembered me too, judging by the cold look he gave me. "Thank you, Deborah," he began. "I've reviewed the public records on Mr. Anderson's installation, and I have serious concerns." While the system may have passed basic inspection, residential microgrids are complex and potentially dangerous. Battery banks can catch fire. Improper load balancing can damage appliances. And if something goes wrong, multiple homes could be affected simultaneously. That's why I have multiple layers of safety protection, I interjected. Every connection point has overcurrent protection, ground fault detection, and automatic disconnection if parameters exceed safe limits. Gerald turned to face me. And who monitors these systems? Who responds if there's a problem at 2 in the morning? Do you have 24/7 support staff? I have remote monitoring with automatic alerts, and I've always responded immediately to any issues. In 18 months of full operation, we've had 0 safety incidents. 0 incidents so far, he countered. But all it takes is one failure, one fire, one electrocution, and we're talking about destroyed homes and lost lives. Is that a risk this community wants to take? The murmuring in the crowd was worried now. I could see the fear spreading, the same fear that Deborah and Gerald were deliberately cultivating. Facts and statistics couldn't compete with visceral fear of fire and electrocution. Deborah stood up again. Thank you, Mr. Harper, for that expert perspective. Now, in light of these safety concerns, I'd like to propose that the board vote tonight on a new rule requiring that all microgrid operations in the community be shut down until a comprehensive third-party safety audit can be completed at the expense of the operator. That would cost tens of thousands of dollars, I protested. Then perhaps you should have considered that before creating a potential hazard in our neighborhood, Deborah shot back. Richard raised his hand. I still don't think we should rush into this. Oliver has been nothing but cooperative, and the city inspection found no violations. The city inspection was basic code compliance, Gerald interjected. It didn't evaluate the long-term safety implications of this kind of distributed power system. The debate went on for another hour, growing increasingly heated. In the end, the board voted 3-2 to require the safety audit, with Richard and Patricia voting against. I was given 60 days to complete the audit or voluntarily shut down the microgrid. The audit had to be conducted by a licensed professional engineer with no prior relationship to me, and the cost would be entirely my responsibility. As people filed out, I approached Richard and Patricia. Thank you for trying, I said quietly. Patricia looked frustrated. Oliver, I'm sorry. Deborah has been working behind the scenes, calling board members, spreading fear. Janet and Stephen were on the fence, and Gerald's testimony pushed them over. Who is Gerald Harper to Deborah? I asked. Why would she bring in an electrician who clearly has an axe to grind with me? Richard grimaced. I did some asking around. Apparently, Gerald is Patricia's cousin, and Deborah knew he had bid on your original installation. She's been very strategic about this. He's not my cousin, Patricia corrected. He's my ex-husband's cousin, and I haven't spoken to him in years. I didn't even know Deborah had contacted him until tonight. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked on arranging the safety audit. The problem was finding someone who met Deborah's criteria and was actually qualified to evaluate microgrid systems. Most electrical engineers specialized in either utility-scale power or small residential installations, not the hybrid approach I had developed. Finally, I found Dr. Rachel Kim, a professor of electrical engineering at Arizona State University, who had published research on residential microgrids and had consulted on similar projects nationwide. She agreed to conduct the audit for a fee of $12,000, which made me wince, but seemed fair given the scope of work. Dr. Kim spent 3 full days examining my system, from the physical infrastructure to the software algorithms that managed load balancing and power routing. She interviewed neighbors who were on the microgrid, reviewed maintenance logs, and even brought in equipment to measure power quality and grid synchronization. When she finally sat down with me to review her findings, I was nervous. "Give it to me straight," I said. "How bad is it?" She looked surprised. "Bad. Mr. Anderson, your system is exceptional. I'm actually hoping to use it as a case study in my research if you'll give permission. The safety systems are redundant and well designed. The power quality exceeds utility standards. And your load management software is more sophisticated than what I've seen in some commercial installations." I felt the tension drain from my shoulders. "So the audit will show the system is safe, not just safe, exemplary. I'll be recommending that not only should your microgrid continue operation, but it could serve as a model for other residential developments. Systems like yours are going to be crucial as we transition to more distributed renewable energy." The audit report was delivered to the HOA board 2 weeks later. It was a thick document filled with technical analysis, but the conclusion was clear and unequivocal. The microgrid posed no safety risk to the community and provided substantial benefits to participants. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. At the next board meeting, Deborah barely acknowledged the audit. "While I appreciate Dr. Kim's professional opinion," she said dismissively, "it doesn't change the fact that the solar panels remain an aesthetic violation. We're not arguing about safety anymore. We're arguing about maintaining the visual standards of our community." "You're moving the goalposts," Patricia said sharply. "First it was about safety, now it's about appearance again. What's your real issue here, Deborah?" "My real issue is that one resident thinks he's above the rules that apply to everyone else," Deborah snapped, her composure finally cracking. "I don't care if his system can power the entire state of Arizona. The panels are ugly, and they need to go." "They're not ugly to me," Sarah Chen said from the audience. "They represent security and affordability for my family." "That's because you're not the one who has to look at them," Deborah retorted. "My property value is being dragged down by having those industrial-looking things looming over the neighborhood." "Actually, about that," I said, standing up, "I had another study done. Would you like to see it?" Before she could object, I pulled up a comparative market analysis on the projector. This was prepared by a certified real estate appraiser. It shows home values in Meadowbrook Heights compared to similar communities in the Phoenix area. Over the past 3 years since my microgrid became operational, our property values have appreciated at a rate 14% higher than comparable neighborhoods. The room went silent as people studied the numbers. "That doesn't prove causation," Deborah argued, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, but the appraiser specifically surveyed recent buyers in our neighborhood. 62% cited the microgrid availability as a positive factor in their decision to purchase here. Homes with microgrid access sold an average of 9 days faster than those without it. The data is pretty clear, Deborah. My solar panels aren't hurting property values. If anything, they're helping." Richard leaned back in his chair. "I think we've spent enough time on this issue." The safety audit cleared Oliver's system. Property values are up, not down. Most residents support the microgrid. I move that we permanently table any enforcement action regarding the solar panels and formally recognize the microgrid as a community asset. "Seconded," Patricia said immediately. The vote was 4-1 with only Deborah voting against. Her face was tight with anger as the gavel came down. "Fine. But this isn't over, Mr. Anderson. Mark my words. I should have taken that threat more seriously." 2 days later, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted "eyesore" in red letters across my garage door. I called the police to file a report, and while the officer was sympathetic, he said without witnesses or camera footage, there wasn't much they could do. "You might want to install some security cameras," he suggested. "If this escalates, documentation will be important." I took his advice, installing cameras that covered my front yard, driveway, and the side of the house where the main electrical equipment was located. It felt paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. The following week, I noticed something odd when I was reviewing my system monitoring logs. There had been 3 attempts to access the microgrid's control interface from an unknown IP address. The attempts had failed because the system required 2-factor authentication, but someone was definitely trying to get in. I immediately changed all passwords and added additional security layers. Then, I started digging through the access logs more carefully. The IP address traced back to a location in Scottsdale, about 15 miles away. I couldn't get more specific than that without a subpoena, but it was clear someone with technical knowledge was attempting to compromise my system. Marcus advised me to document everything and consider filing for a restraining order if I could prove Deborah was behind the harassment. "The problem is you need evidence," he said. "Right now, all you have is circumstantial." The evidence came sooner than expected. I was working in my garage on a Saturday afternoon, performing routine maintenance on one of the battery banks, when my phone started buzzing with alerts. Multiple microgrid subscribers were reporting power fluctuations. I pulled up the monitoring dashboard and immediately saw the problem. Someone had managed to access the system and was manually forcing rapid switches between different power sources, creating voltage spikes that could damage sensitive electronics. I shut down the remote access capability entirely and switched everything to manual control from my local network. The fluctuations stopped, but my heart was racing. This wasn't just vandalism anymore. This was sabotage that could have caused serious equipment damage in dozens of homes. I immediately called the police, and this time I asked specifically for someone from the cybercrime unit. Detective Lisa Morneau arrived an hour later, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened carefully as I explained what had happened. "Can you trace who did this?" she asked, examining my security logs. "I can show you the IP address of the attempts, and I can show you the successful access," I said, pulling up the relevant data. "But I don't know who was physically at that location when it happened. Let me take this information back to the station. We may be able to get a warrant for the ISB records to identify the account holder." She paused. "Do you have any reason to believe someone specific is targeting you?" I hesitated, then told her about the ongoing conflict with Deborah and the HOA. "I don't want to make accusations without proof," I said carefully, "but there's definitely been an escalating pattern of harassment." "Document everything," Lisa advised. "Every incident, every interaction, every piece of correspondence. If this person crosses the line into criminal behavior, we'll need that evidence." Over the next few days, I worked to rebuild the security around my system's remote access. I also started keeping a detailed log of everything related to the HOA conflict, as Lisa had suggested. Then, the following Monday, something happened that changed everything. I was at work when I got a frantic call from Sarah Chen. "Oliver, you need to get home right now. There's a city crew at your house, and they're saying they have an order to disconnect your electrical system." I left work immediately, breaking probably a dozen speed limits to get home. When I arrived, I found a utility truck parked in my driveway and 2 workers standing near my garage with Deborah Garrison supervising. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, jumping out of my car. One of the workers, a young guy who looked uncomfortable, held up a work order. "Sir, we have an emergency disconnect order from the city. There's been a complaint about dangerous electrical conditions at this address." "That's impossible. I just had a full safety audit 2 weeks ago." I turned to Deborah. "What did you do?" She looked pleased with herself. "I filed a complaint with the city about the power fluctuations that occurred on Saturday. Obviously, your system is malfunctioning and creating hazards." The city agreed that immediate disconnection is necessary to protect the community. "The fluctuations were caused by someone hacking into my system," I said through gritted teeth. "The police are investigating." The worker looked uncertain now. "Sir, if there's a dispute about this, we can pause while you contact the city. But we do have a signed emergency order." I called Marcus immediately, explaining the situation. He conferenced in the city's legal department, and after 20 minutes of heated discussion, the disconnect order was temporarily suspended pending a hearing the next day. The utility workers left, and Deborah stood there looking frustrated. "You can't keep fighting this forever, Oliver. One way or another, those panels are coming down." "Why?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "Why are you so obsessed with this? What did I ever do to you?" For a moment, something flickered in her expression, something raw and bitter. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Coming into this neighborhood with your big fancy engineering degree, your expensive solar panels, playing the hero for everyone. Meanwhile, some of us have been living here for years, working to maintain standards, and nobody appreciates it. Nobody thanks the HOA president for keeping the neighborhood nice. But you put up some panels, and suddenly you're everyone's best friend." I stared at her, finally understanding. This wasn't about aesthetics or property values or safety. This was about ego and jealousy and control. Deborah couldn't stand that I had something the community valued, something that made me more important than her position as HOA president. "Deborah, this doesn't have to be a fight," I said carefully. "The microgrid helps people. It helps you, whether you want to admit it or not. Why can't we just coexist?" "Because you're making me look weak," she said quietly, and for a moment the mask slipped entirely. "Every time the board sides with you instead of me, it undermines my authority. If I can't even enforce simple aesthetic rules, what's the point of having a president at all?" Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in my driveway wondering if there was any way to resolve this that didn't end in complete destruction. The hearing at the city the next day was tense. I brought Marcus, all my safety documentation, and the police report about the hacking incident. Deborah showed up with Gerald Harper again, ready to testify about alleged safety violations. The city's hearing officer, a stern woman named Margaret Wells, listened to both sides present their cases. When it was my turn, I laid out everything: the original permits, the safety audit, the evidence of sabotage, and the timeline of escalating harassment. "Miss Wells, my system has operated safely for 18 months, I concluded. The only incident occurred when someone criminally accessed my controls. That's not a system failure, that's a crime. Punishing me for being the victim of sabotage doesn't make sense." Gerald tried to argue that any system that could be hacked was inherently unsafe, but Margaret shut him down. "By that logic, we'd have to disconnect every smart home, every internet-connected device, every modern vehicle. Cybersecurity is a concern for all connected systems, but it's not grounds for an emergency disconnection." She reviewed the safety audit report carefully, asking pointed questions about specific technical details. Finally, she looked up at Deborah. "Miss Garrison, you filed this emergency complaint alleging imminent danger to the community. Based on the evidence presented, I don't see any such danger. The system has been independently verified as safe. The power fluctuations were the result of a criminal act, not a system defect. I'm lifting the emergency disconnect order and dismissing this complaint. Deborah's face went pale. But the panels are still in violation of HOA rules. That's a civil matter between you and Mr. Anderson, Margaret said firmly. This hearing is about electrical safety, not homeowners association disputes. If you have an HOA issue, resolve it through appropriate legal channels. Don't waste city resources on frivolous emergency complaints. As we left the building, Marcus turned to me. That was a win, but you realize she's not going to stop, right? I know, I said tiredly. What are my options? We could file a harassment claim, maybe get a restraining order. If the police can prove she was behind the hacking, that would be even better. But honestly, Oliver, the cleanest solution might be to just move. Sell the house, find a different neighborhood, start over. The thought made me angry. I had built something important here, something that helped people. Why should I be the one to leave? But I was exhausted. The constant fighting, the stress, the time and money spent on lawyers and audits and hearings. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe it was time to cut my losses. I was still debating what to do when Detective Morneau called 2 days later. Mr. Anderson, I have some information about the cyber attack on your system. Can you come down to the station? When I arrived, Lisa had a folder of documents spread across her desk. We got the warrant for the ISB records, she explained. The IP address that accessed your system traces back to an account registered to Gerald Harper. I felt my pulse quicken. Deborah's electrician friend? Correct. We brought him in for questioning this morning. He initially denied everything, but when we showed him the evidence, he broke down pretty quickly. He admitted to accessing your system and causing the power fluctuations. He also admitted that Deborah Garrison paid him $5,000 to do it. The room seemed to spin. She paid him to sabotage my system. According to his statement, yes. The plan was to create evidence of system malfunctions that would justify the city disconnecting you permanently. He also admitted to sending the anonymous letters warning residents about liability risks. Can you arrest her? I asked. We already did. She's being charged with conspiracy to commit computer fraud and cybercrime, plus filing a false report with the city. Mr. Harper is facing multiple counts of unauthorized computer access and criminal damage. Both of them are looking at significant fines and possible jail time. I sat back, trying to process this information. It was over, really over. Deborah had gone too far, crossed the line from civil harassment into actual crimes, and now she would face real consequences. There's something else, Lisa said. When we searched Miss Garrison's home, we found documents related to other HOA enforcement actions she was pursuing. There's evidence she was using her position to target residents she personally disliked, fabricating violations and falsifying board votes. The HOA's attorney has been notified, and there's going to be a full investigation into her conduct as president. Over the following weeks, the story spread through Meadowbrook Heights like wildfire. Deborah was removed as HOA president, and the board held a special election. Patricia Hughes was voted in as the new president, running on a platform of transparent governance and community cooperation. One of her first acts was to officially recognize the microgrid in the HOA's architectural guidelines as an approved community amenity. The families who had disconnected out of fear asked to be reconnected, and I was happy to do it. Gerald Harper took a plea deal and was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, plus 2 years probation and community service. He also had to pay restitution for the damage caused during the sabotage incident. Deborah fought the charges initially, hiring an expensive lawyer and trying to claim she was being persecuted for doing her job as HOA president. But the evidence was overwhelming. Text messages between her and Gerald planning the sabotage, bank records showing the payment, and witness testimony from other board members about her pattern of harassment. In the end, she took a plea deal too: 1 year in jail, 3 years probation, and a $10,000 fine. She was also ordered to pay restitution to me for legal fees and system damage. Her house went up for sale before she even started serving her sentence. The legal drama attracted media attention, and suddenly, I was doing interviews with local news stations about the microgrid and the importance of community renewable energy. Arizona Public Service, the main utility company, even reached out to discuss potentially partnering with me to develop similar systems in other neighborhoods. 6 months after Deborah's arrest, I stood in my backyard at a neighborhood barbecue, watching kids play in the pool while adults chatted and laughed. Tom Martinez came over with a beer for me. "Hell of a year," he said, clinking his bottle against mine. "That's one way to put it," I agreed. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just taken down the panels when she first demanded it?" he asked. I considered the question. Honestly, I think she would have found something else to target. Some people just need conflict. They need to feel like they're in control, even if it means burning everything down around them. "Well, I'm glad you didn't give in," Tom said. "My electric bill last month was $63. In August, in Arizona, that's basically magic." Sarah Chen joined us, her kids running past covered in sunscreen and carrying pool noodles. "Oliver, I just wanted to say thank you again. I know this past year was hell for you, but what you built here matters. It's not just about saving money. It's about community resilience and taking care of each other." "That was always the goal," I said. "I just wanted to prove that we don't have to rely entirely on centralized power systems. Neighborhoods can take some control over their own energy future." As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, I found myself on my roof checking the solar panels, something I did regularly as part of routine maintenance. From up there, I could see across most of Meadowbrook Heights, the neat rows of houses with their tile roofs and desert landscaping. And I could see my panels, still standing, still generating power, still keeping the lights on for 43 families who had placed their trust in me and my system. Deborah had been wrong about so many things. The panels weren't an eyesore. They were a symbol of innovation and community cooperation. They didn't hurt property values, they enhanced them. And they weren't a violation of what made Meadowbrook Heights special, they were an expression of it. The HOA had a new president now, one who understood that rules existed to serve the community, not the other way around. The microgrid had proven its value beyond any doubt, and Deborah was serving her time, hopefully learning that positions of authority come with responsibilities, not just power. I climbed down from the roof as the last rays of sunlight painted the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone buzzed with an alert from the monitoring system. The batteries were fully charged. The panels had generated 147 kilowatt-hours that day, and the grid was operating at optimal efficiency. Everything was working exactly as it should. The following months brought new developments. The Arizona Corporation Commission, which regulates utilities in the state, launched an investigation into policies that might be hindering residential microgrid development. They invited me to testify about my experiences, and I spent a day in Phoenix explaining the technical and economic benefits of distributed energy systems. Several other neighborhoods reached out, asking if I could help them develop similar microgrids. I started consulting on the side, designing systems that could be replicated in different communities. It turned out that my battle with Deborah had inadvertently launched a second career. Arizona Public Service came back with a formal proposal. They wanted to pilot a program where the utility would help finance and support residential microgrids, in exchange for being able to draw on the stored battery power during peak demand periods. It was a win-win arrangement, reducing strain on the main grid during hot summer afternoons while providing additional revenue to microgrid operators. I negotiated a deal where Meadowbrook Heights would be the test case. APS would provide upgraded battery storage at no cost to participants, and in return, they could tap into our batteries for up to 4 hours per day during peak summer demand. Participants would receive credits on their electric bills for the power supplied. When I presented the proposal to the neighborhood at a community meeting, the response was enthusiastic. Even residents who weren't currently on the microgrid wanted to join now that there was utility backing and additional financial benefits. Patricia, in her role as HOA president, worked with me to streamline the approval process for new installations. We developed clear guidelines that protected the community's aesthetic standards while explicitly permitting solar panels and microgrid infrastructure. Other HOAs in the Phoenix area started adopting our guidelines as a template. Tom Martinez joked that I should run for the HOA board myself, but I declined. I had learned that I preferred building and engineering solutions to managing political processes. Let Patricia and her team handle the governance. I would stick to making sure the lights stayed on. The criminal cases against Deborah and Gerald concluded with their guilty pleas, but there was also a civil dimension. I filed a lawsuit seeking damages for the harassment, the sabotage, and the costs I had incurred defending myself against false complaints. My attorney estimated we could recover most of my legal fees plus punitive damages. Deborah's lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement, but I wasn't interested in making it easy for her. She had deliberately tried to destroy something valuable out of pure spite, and I wanted a judgment on the record that would deter others from similar behavior. The civil trial was brief. With the criminal convictions already in place, establishing liability was straightforward. The judge awarded me $87,000 in damages, covering legal fees, system repairs, lost consulting income during the period when I was focused on the HOA battle, and punitive damages for the malicious nature of her conduct. Deborah would be paying that debt off for years, even after she finished her jail sentence. Her house eventually sold to a young couple with 2 kids who were thrilled to learn about the microgrid. They signed up immediately, bringing my total subscriber count to 47 homes. One afternoon, about a year after Deborah's arrest, I was installing a new monitoring display in the community center that would show real-time data about the microgrid's performance. Patricia stopped by to check on the progress. "This is fantastic," she said, watching the screen cycle through different metrics. "People are going to love seeing how much power we're generating and how much carbon we're offsetting." "Transparency is important," I agreed. "The more people understand how the system works, the more they appreciate it." "You know, Deborah actually did you a favor in a weird way," Patricia mused. "If she hadn't forced you to fight for the microgrid, it might have just stayed a small project serving a few houses. Now it's becoming a model for the whole state." I had thought the same thing myself. Deborah's obstruction had forced me to document everything, to prove the value of the system beyond any doubt, to build political and community support. The result was something much more robust and influential than I had originally envisioned. "I still wouldn't recommend her method of motivation," I said dryly. Patricia laughed. No, definitely not, but silver linings and all that. The local news ran a follow-up story on the anniversary of Deborah's arrest, contrasting the community's thriving microgrid with her current situation in jail. The reporter interviewed several residents who talked about how the system had benefited them. Sarah Chen spoke about being able to work from home without worrying about power outages. Tom Martinez talked about the peace of mind of having reliable backup power for medical equipment. A newer resident explained that the microgrid had been a major factor in her decision to buy in Meadowbrook Heights. The reporter also interviewed Patricia about the HOA's transformed approach to solar and renewable energy. "We learned an important lesson," Patricia said. "Rules and standards are important, but they have to serve the community's real interests, not just aesthetics for their own sake. Innovation and progress sometimes require flexibility." The segment ended with footage of my solar panels gleaming in the Arizona sun, and a graphic showing the system's impressive statistics. Over 500,000 kilowatt-hours generated, 130 tons of carbon emissions avoided, and an average cost savings of 42% for participants. I watched the news story from my living room, feeling a sense of accomplishment, but also reflection. The battle with Deborah had been exhausting and expensive, but it had taught me important lessons about community organizing, political strategy, and the importance of documentation. It had also reinforced my belief in what I was building. Renewable energy and distributed microgrids weren't just environmentally important, they were economically beneficial and increased community resilience. If I could make it work in Meadowbrook Heights despite active opposition, it could work anywhere. The consulting business continued to grow. I helped design microgrid systems for 3 other neighborhoods in the Phoenix area, and I was in talks with communities in Tucson and Flagstaff. Each project built on lessons learned from previous ones, creating more efficient and cost-effective designs. Arizona State University offered me an adjunct teaching position, developing a course on residential microgrid design and implementation. I accepted, figuring that training the next generation of engineers on these systems would multiply the impact beyond what I could do individually. Tom Martinez organized a neighborhood celebration for the microgrid's 3rd anniversary. We set up in the community center with food, drinks, and a presentation about the system's history and accomplishments. Over 100 people attended, including reporters, city officials, and representatives from other HOAs interested in learning from our experience. During the presentation, I pulled up a slide comparing our original goals for the microgrid with what we had actually achieved. We had exceeded our targets for energy production, cost savings, and reliability. The system that had started as a personal project now served nearly 50 homes and had become a case study in successful community energy systems. 3 years ago, I installed some solar panels on my roof, I said to the assembled crowd. I had no idea it would lead to all of this. I definitely didn't expect to spend 6 months fighting the HOA and dealing with criminal sabotage. But I'm grateful for this community support, and I'm proud of what we've built together. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. After the formal presentation, people mingled and asked questions about technical details, upcoming upgrades, and possibilities for expansion. A woman I didn't recognize approached me with a curious expression. "Mr. Anderson, I'm Jennifer Walsh, a reporter with the Arizona Republic. I'm working on a longer feature story about the growth of residential microgrids in Arizona, and your system here is obviously a central example. Would you be willing to do an extended interview?" I agreed, and we scheduled a time for the following week. The resulting article, published a month later, was a comprehensive look at how residential renewable energy was changing Arizona's power landscape. It featured interviews with utility executives, state regulators, environmental advocates, and residents of multiple microgrid communities. The article detailed my conflict with Deborah, but it framed the story as an example of how outdated thinking and resistance to change could ultimately backfire. The HOA's attempt to shut down the microgrid had instead catalyzed broader reforms and recognition of renewable energy's value. One quote from the article particularly resonated with people. A state energy official said, "The Meadowbrook Heights case demonstrated that communities can't afford to let aesthetics or tradition block practical solutions to energy challenges. We need more Oliver Andersons and fewer Deborah Garrisons if we're going to meet our renewable energy goals." The article was shared widely on social media and picked up by national publications. I started getting emails from people around the country asking for advice on starting their own microgrid projects and dealing with HOA resistance. I created a website with resources, technical guides, and legal templates for navigating HOA and permitting processes. Within 6 months, the site was getting thousands of visits per month, and a whole community of residential microgrid enthusiasts was sharing experiences and solutions. 2 years after Deborah's arrest, I was invited to speak at a national conference on distributed energy systems. My presentation focused on the lessons learned from Meadowbrook Heights, the importance of proper permitting, the value of community engagement, the need for robust safety systems, and strategies for overcoming political opposition. During the Q&A session, someone asked if I had any regrets about how things had unfolded. I thought carefully before answering. I regret that it had to become so adversarial. I wish Deborah had been willing to listen and understand what the microgrid could do for the community, instead of seeing it as a personal threat. But I don't regret fighting for the system, because what we built has real value. Sometimes you have to stand up for what matters, even when it's difficult and costly. The moderator asked a follow-up question. What would you say to other people facing similar opposition from HOAs or local authorities? Document everything. Get professional help early, whether that's lawyers, engineers, or consultants. Build community support by clearly communicating the benefits of what you're doing. And don't give up, because these systems are too important for our energy future to let obstruction and fear win. The conference presentation led to more consulting opportunities and speaking invitations. The microgrid had evolved from a personal project into a movement, with dozens of communities now implementing similar systems across Arizona and other states. Meadowbrook Heights itself continued to thrive. Property values had appreciated significantly, outpacing comparable neighborhoods without microgrids. The community had become known as an innovative, forward-thinking place to live, attracting young professionals and families interested in sustainability. Patricia's leadership as HOA president was a stark contrast to Deborah's approach. She focused on enhancing community amenities and quality of life, rather than rigid enforcement of aesthetic rules. The neighborhood felt more relaxed and cohesive, with residents actually wanting to participate in HOA activities instead of dreading board meetings. 3 years after the initial conflict, I received a letter from Deborah. It was brief and awkward, clearly written as part of her probation requirements rather than genuine contrition. She apologized for her actions and acknowledged that she had let personal feelings cloud her judgment. I didn't respond. Some things didn't need a response. She had made her choices and faced the consequences. The system she had tried to destroy was now more successful than ever, and the community she had tried to control had moved on without her. The microgrid continued to expand. With the success of the APS partnership, other utilities were now approaching me about replicating the model. I was working with a software company to develop a platform that could manage multiple microgrids simultaneously, creating a network of distributed energy resources that could support the main grid during peak demand. The vision was ambitious. Neighborhoods across Arizona connected through smart microgrid technology, each generating and storing solar power, all coordinated to maximize efficiency and reliability. It would require significant investment and coordination, but the technical foundation was there, proven by the system running in my own neighborhood. 5 years after installing those first solar panels, I stood on my roof again during a brilliant Arizona sunset. The panels had now generated over 1 million kilowatt-hours of clean energy. They had powered homes through heat waves and monsoon storms, saved families thousands of dollars, and sparked a broader movement toward distributed renewable energy. And they had survived the determined opposition of an HOA president who couldn't see past her own ego to recognize their value. Below me, the neighborhood was coming alive with evening activity. Kids riding bikes, neighbors chatting across fences, families grilling dinner in backyards. Lights were coming on in houses, powered by the sun's energy stored in batteries, managed by software that seamlessly balanced supply and demand. It was all working exactly as I had envisioned, better even, because the community had embraced it and made it their own. This wasn't just my project anymore. It was Meadowbrook Heights microgrid, a shared resource that everyone took pride in. I climbed down from the roof and went inside, where my monitoring displays showed the system status. Everything was green, all parameters optimal. 47 homes drawing power from clean, locally generated electricity. Deborah had demanded I remove my solar panels, not knowing that I powered their entire grid. Her ignorance had been her downfall, and her obstruction had ultimately strengthened what she tried to destroy. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't dwell on it. There was too much work to do, too many new systems to design, too many communities ready to take control of their energy future. The solar panels stayed on my roof, and the lights stayed on throughout Meadowbrook Heights, powered by innovation, community cooperation, and the determination to build something better despite those who would rather tear it down.